Greetings, and welcome back to the MCOC Encyclopedia. Today, we'll be covering the second of March's champions, Prerelease, the Destroyer Armour. So, the Destroyer Armour, or just the Destroyer. All these are available on the Kabam website, and I will link them below, as with the deep dive. So, the Destroyer is magically non-magnetic construct, so no mags, immune to slow, armor break, poison, and bleed. Additionally, no regen masteries. That roughly considers him the same as a robot. A lot of other robots don't benefit from the willpower mastery, which kind of makes sense based on the name. So yeah, we'll let it slide, that's fine. Immune to slow will come up a lot later, and I think this will make him quite a tricky defender. Personally, I believe this guy is going to be a tougher defender than the Serpent, but we'll get there when we get there. Immune to armor break is nice. That's probably in there to basically stop champions like Cosmic Ghost Rider, but a lot of Cosmics, bearing in mind this guy's Mystic, do rank up a lot of their damage from armor breaks. So Hela's damage is reduced, Null is going to be absolutely neutered, CGR is going to be down, so it's just sort of there to cancel the annoying ones. You can be used for Arcus as well. Poison and Bleed, always a good solid set to have, which also means he can be run with the recoil tree if you're using him on offense. The Destroyer is devoid of emotions and immune to Infuriate and Intimidate. Makes sense, and a really nice piece of utility. I'll be interested to see where it comes in, but I mean, you'll see in parts of this kit that he is basically designed to counter Hercules, which kind of makes sense as the Godslayer armor, but yep, no, that's fine. It'll also counter Mantis to quite some extent. These are relatively new effects, so it'll be interesting to see if any champions come out in the future where this is more useful. All attacks destroy any indestructible and immortality buffs on the opponent, replace them with rubble buffs for 15 seconds. And it states here from Kabam, the buff Destroy ability does not trigger Mystic Dispersion because it's not a nullify. So, indestructible and immortality buffs, that's really nice, but that does mean we can't use it to counter the Serpent because he gains death immunity. It also specifically says buffs, and I believe that Immortal Hulk, his immortality is a passive, which makes sense, again, Mystic on Science class disadvantage. Rubble buffs do nothing, they are just rubble. I do hope that this is calibrated in the system correctly. There are many, say, nodes, for example, that trigger when you nullify or stagger an opponent's buff, so I hope this Destroy doesn't trigger them, and it's unique to Destroyer, and that would be a really nice piece of utility. When the opponent gains a buff, while attacking the Destroyer's block, destroy one of their newest buffs and replace it with another rubble buff. This is here, in my opinion, this is for Hulkling. This is to stop Hulkling gaining Pierce. That's pretty much what it's here for. So any buff gained while hitting into the Destroyer's block will just be instantly replaced with rubble. It does say destroy one of their newest buffs, so if there's some situation, not that I can think of one off the top of my head, where you would gain multiple buffs attacking into his block, it might only be one, but given I can't think of anywhere to test this, not entirely sure what's going to happen there. Capital I and magical. The Destroyer is passively unstoppable whilst dashing towards the opponent, plus for half a second afterwards. So you can't intercept this guy. And he's immune to slow. This is really, really going to make him tough. Simply, you can't intercept him or do anything whilst he's dashing forward. If struck whilst dashing and unstoppable, the effect goes on cooldown for 15 seconds. So if you do try and intercept him, he's going to be unstoppable, so essentially you're going to lose the intercept because he's going to hit you. But you did fulfill this criteria, so it goes on cooldown. However, because he has to be dashing and unstoppable, that doesn't mean you can keep it on cooldown permanently by intercepting him every 15 seconds, because he has to be unstoppable whilst you do it. That's quite annoying. If it was just if struck whilst dashing it goes on cooldown, that would be much nicer. Or until you gain 3 buffs. So 3 dexes, which you will be triggering, probably, and we'll come on to that when we get to his specials, and then it comes back again. So what can we use to get around this? I mean, Titania and her Haymaker gives her not only indestructible, but also, not only unstoppable, but also indestructible, and they are passives, so this ability shouldn't trigger for her indestructible. But he gains his unstoppable more often than you gain yours. so that'll be interesting to see how that works. We will be able to use Decelerate, which comes from champions like Anti-Venom, but a lack of Slow is going to make him really quite annoying. You can just parry him freely, of course, but if, say, you were placing him in Alliance War for defense there, place him on the One Eye Open node, which means you basically have to intercept him, or just flat out on a stun immune node, you're going to be in for some real pain. Whilst the opponent has an active buff, gains a protection passive reducing damage taken for 5% for each buff to a maximum of 5 buffs. So the more buffs you have, the less damage he takes. For most of the counters we're going to want to use against this guy, it's basically just going to be the dexterity buffs. That's sort of going to come and go. This also says buffs and not unique buffs. So ones of the same type will count. Kabam here say the unstoppable dashing offers some nice protection for safe intercepts, allowing him to gain his destruction charges quickly. Though there is no, we'll come on to destruction charge in a second. There's no comment here about his intended use as a defender, and I think this will make him really tough. Speaking of destruction charges, capping out at 100, he gains 2 whenever an immunity to armor break triggers. So that'll be nice versus champions like Arcus and Terrax, and Annihilus as well. When the opponent gains a buff, or fails to gain a buff due to buff immunity. So we can't use buff immune champions sort of freely here. Whenever you dex, and buff immunity prevents your buff from triggering, that won't work. Gaining charges from buff immunity can only trigger every 1.5 seconds. So when we're doing triple dexes on the specials that we'll get to later, this will only trigger once, which I guess is nice. Gains 5 destructive charge when intercepting the opponent and when punishing a heavy or special attack. And bearing in mind, he's going to be unstoppable a lot when trying to intercept, so if you're using him offensively, you will be able to really go for those intercepts, make him a very safe option for doing that. This is something less we'll have to worry about on defense, but something to think about. Here's the big one. Loses 1 charge when inflicted with a non-damaging debuff other than stun. Loses 1 charge when inflicted with any non-damaging debuff other than stun. So any champion that can really spam out those debuffs is going to be helping to drain his charges very quickly. And as long as you aren't getting intercepted and aren't dexing too much, you will be able to keep his charges under control. Again, Titania is looking like an excellent option here, for the simple reason that on every one of her light attacks, she inflicts a debuff. Non-damaging as well, so champions like Torch won't trigger this, though he might still be a good option because Torch versus Mystic. Every 25 charges gains a Big Fury for 20 seconds. These numbers are based on a 6-star rank 5, by the way, so it'll be more or less depending on what you're up against, for 20 seconds. These passives refresh on Special 3, or when the opponent is knocked down. On offense, this is a really nice ability. Your damage goes up over time, and you can keep them paused indefinitely. As long as you can throw a heavy attack every 20 seconds, you're absolutely fine. This stage just knocks down, not knocked down by a special attack. Why do we need to keep those charges down? Well, when reaching 100 charges, consumes all of them to gain a power gain passive, granting 4 bars of power over 10 seconds. 4 bars of power. So even if he has no power whatsoever, in 7.5 seconds, you are taking a Special 3. Whilst his power gain is active, he cannot gain new charges. So your entire goal in this fight is to keep the destruction charges down as far as possible. Every 25, you're going to be taking more damage. At 100, you're basically going to die. That's it, because his Special 3 is going to one-shot you. Maybe. Or his Special 2 might one-shot you. This is really potent. However, unlike the Serpent, there has been no mention here of ability combat power rate, or ability power rate, combat power rate. So champions like Spidey 99, and Void, if you were feeling really cheeky, you could purposefully get him to 100 charges, which honestly, I don't know how easy that's going to be. We'll see when he comes out exactly how that plays. But you can then just reverse this and watch his power go absolutely through the floor. Spidey 99's Wither at base is 150%, so he will lose 6 bars over that 10 seconds. So you can just constantly hit him and let your ruptures detonate over and over and over again. On to the specials. Let's go watch the first one. Change tab. There we go. So, the Destroyer's Special 1 is simply 3 melee hits. Let's slow it down so we can watch it, and I hope this comes through better than it did on the Serpent video. So, here we go. Melee 1, melee 2, jump, melee 3. That is a very, very simple special attack to deal with. We speed it up. It's 1, 2, and 3. One more time. 1, 2, and 3. Very little to it. However, each attack grants 10 destruction charges on hit, block, or whiff. This is a new sort of way of gaining charges that we haven't seen before, as far as I'm aware. If the opponent dodges the attack with the Dex Mastery or Dex Replacement, no charges are gained. Sorry if you can hear the sirens. So what this means is if you just back away from this, as we would with basically every single other sort of melee attack, just think of like Rogue's Special 1 and Special 2. Those are both 3-hit melee attacks. You just back off and let them do whatever. But he gains his charges on whiff. And as a defender, he gains 15 instead, which means 1 Special 1, he's got 45 charges. 2 Special 1s, he's got 90 charges, which basically means, assuming, because you have to dex these, so assuming, well, actually, you don't have to dex them to avoid those charges, but assuming you've been dexing, say, to try and bait out his specials, he's at 90 charges after 2 bars of power. This is going to really, really make him annoying if you don't have a way to keep those charges down. And if you can dex them, he won't gain those charges, but you will still give him 2 charges because you've gained the dex buff. So, after 3, he's guaranteed to be there. The final hit is passively unblockable. That's not a big deal, just because it's a very simple melee attack. I don't mind that. And actually, on offense, that'll be a nice safety net. If you throw it, they don't play into it. That final hit is a guaranteed wham. Very nice. And inflicts a non-stacking hinder debuff of 75% potency for 20 seconds. If the opponents are back against the wall, all hits are unblockable. That's more interesting, and still shouldn't pose a greater threat. This hinder debuff is only triggered on hit and on the final hit, so this isn't like Dragon Man's Special 1, which inflicts ineptitude, which is very similar, but not quite the same. But he inflicts that on block. We can't do that here. Hinder is the opposite of aptitude, and it reduces the potency of all new buffs by 75%. Dragon Man and his ineptitude only reduces the potency of some buffs. So Hinder is all of them, ineptitude is just a few. It's Fury, Armor Break, Precision, Cruelty. There might be a few others, but those are the main ones. This is where he's going to be gaining all of his charges from, which may become a problem. But we still might want to bait it out more than the Special 2. The Special 2 then. So that's Hinder, right, and... So, here's our Special 2. I'm going to slow it down again. So, 1 hit. So far, we're all good. Here's where the problem lies. So, let's play that again. So, melee hit, Visor Blast. And if we just see right at the end of this, melee hit, we can see there, right there, I hope that's coming through on the quality well enough, that is a burst of 46,636 damage. Why is that an issue? The first hit pauses any degen, we'll come to that in a second. The Destroyer is passively unblockable during the final 3 hits. So it's a triple beam dex. Think about Doctor Doom's Special 2, that's 1, 1, and then a triple beam. Your timing on this is going to have to be very, very precise. And it's not like you can block the first hit and dex out of the last 2, because he's unblockable for the whole thing. The final hit, as we said, deals a burst of direct damage, but the potency is increased while he's suffering for degen. We'll come on to that in a second. I don't like this. The simple reason is Kabam says, as a defender, the Special 2 always packs enough punch to one-shot you. Designing an unblockable ability that's basically just going to one-shot you is not fun, in my opinion. Maybe some people like that skill challenge, but personally, I'm not about that. So we're going to have to learn as a community how to dex that Special 2 very, very reliably, or you're going to take a huge burst of damage to the face. There is also something that isn't specified here, which deals 909 direct damage. What it doesn't say is does this scale with modified attack? What I mean by that is, if you stick him on a node that has plus 200% health damage, as is one of the most common node types in the game, does that scale? If it does, that's even more rubbish. For example, 46,000 damage on a burst is annoying but survivable. You know, most, because that was a 7-star rank 2, 7-star rank 3 in the showcase. A champion at that level you can survive. You know, you're looking at champions that have 70 to 100,000 health. If this is increased based on the node, you aren't surviving it, which I think is quite rubbish. An ability basically designed to one-shot you isn't particularly fun. But we have our way around it, and the simple way around it is just stick to the special 1. The problem is he's got his big power gain, so there's a chance that if you can't keep that down, he's just going to move to the special 1, or special 2, sorry, and then you're just going to have to deal with that. But we'll see. Special 3, degen passive, quite a big one. The odds of you surviving a special 3 aren't great anyway, but just note you'll survive it even less. This is important for those that will be facing him in Alliance War, where you can use the invulnerability boost, because even if you use the invul boost to tank all the damage from the special 3, you're still eating a pretty meaty degen, which might deal enough damage to kill you. Again, we don't know if this scales with his base attack or his modified attack. Gains a non-stacking energized passive 33% potency for 10 seconds, pause during his special attacks. That's fine, he gains more power. This is primarily an offensive ability. Whilst his passive is active, he cannot activate special 3, and the special 1 and 2 grant no power to the opponent. The design here is that you use your mega power gain while you're at about, say, 2 bars of power, zoom to special 3, throw the special 3, and then because it grants 4 bars of power, you still have enough power gain to bring you up to the special 2. You can throw your special 2, get the big burst damage. Because they're still degenerating, it's even bigger based on the special 3. That's the design. I don't see that sort of coming into an issue or coming into play as a defender, but we'll see. Unblockable buff for 6 seconds. This again is just to play into this. You can play really aggressively, but something to note. Signature ability, Ultimate as Guardian Weapon. Great name. The destroyer's personal power gain is paused while at 3 bars of power. Whilst the power gain is active, special 3 damage is increased by 50%. So when he's awakened, I'm presuming this 50% is going to scale, but I don't know that for certain. I don't know which numbers here scale with Sig level. So this is actually really nice for him on offense, because it means you don't have to worry about throwing your special 3 straight away, and this will trigger at Sig 1 most likely. However, on defense, that means even if you survive the special 3, you survive the direct damage that comes from the degen passive, he still has a lot of power to gain. If he's at 2 bars of power and throws the special 3, he still has 3 bars of power in the bank, meaning he's going for another special 3 in about 7.5 seconds time. And the damage is increased, yay. The protection passive potency from the enchanted armor is increased by a flat 5% per buff. Again, this might scale, it could scale between say 2 and 5%, 1 and 5%, we don't know. So, if we go all the way back to the top, we can see that he gains whilst present any buff, reducing damage taken by 5% for each buff to a maximum of 5 buffs. So I'm going to assume that at max Sig, this is now 10% for each buff, up to a maximum of 5 buffs. If you have a lot of buffs on you, that is really nasty. I don't know why you'd want to go up against this guy with lots of buffs, but actually I think this is, despite looking like a defensive ability, I actually think it's an offensive one, that people are just going to glance over, they go, okay, yeah, protection, whatever, don't care. I think this will actually come to play much more than people think, because effectively doubling your health against high buff matchups, again, they don't have to be unique, so this will work on Resistor, for example. This is great, and it won't come into play too much when he's on defense. However, when struck, inflicts an instant rupture dealing 40% of the damage prevented by personal protection as physical damage to a maximum amount. This rupture also destroys indestructible and immortal buffs. So, let's break this down. When struck, so this is when you hit him, inflict instant rupture, which means the only champion we can use against him to deal with that is Scorpion. Deals 40% of the damage prevented by this personal protection as physical damage. So, the interesting thing to notice is this is scaling. There's a maximum on it, but this is scaling. If you just sort of gently poke him, you will be taking basically no damage. If you're using a big burst champion, say someone like Shang-Chi, Sunspot, Ghost and so on, you will be taking much more damage because you're using big hits. Damage prevented by personal protection as physical damage. So, if you have, say, 5 buffs on you, which is unlikely for you attacking this guy, but let's look at our worst case scenario. 5 buffs on you means he'll be presenting 50% of the damage, and then you take 40% of that 50% as direct damage, so that's 20% of the damage you deal at maximum. So if you hit him for, say, 40,000 damage, that's pretty big. You would take 8,000 damage back, however, it is capped. This is very difficult to judge until we've seen it in practice. If you're taking sort of 400 damage, just for example's sake, on every hit, that will add up. That's 2,000 damage a combo. You know, after 50 hits in a fight something, that's going to really eat into your health bar. But I don't see this being as big an issue as someone like Electro, where you will die before he does. If you can keep buffs on you, this all goes away. No issues at all. So that is really where we'll be focusing our attention. This also destroys indestructible and immortal buffs. This just means you can't hurt cheese him. That's pretty much all it's going for. If you have immortal and you hit into him, it'll disappear, and then that damage will kill you. I'm making the assumption that the order of operations here will be that the Rupture will destroy the immortal buff and then trigger the damage. But I don't know that for sure. If that is the case, as soon as you hit him, you will die. But if it's not, on the second hit, you will die, because your first hit will remove your buff, and then the second hit, assuming you're at 1 health, will trigger some damage back to you, and that'll be game. So what do we actually need to beat this guy? Well, his two primary annoyances come from his destruction charges, which lead to the power gain, but also from that unstoppable on dash-in. Looking at the unstoppable then, he is immune to slow, which means we can't use that as an option, but we can use decelerate to reduce the chances of it proccing, and also the relatively new grit passive, which has started to be introduced to the game as well, which can also be used to bypass that unstoppable. The primary person that has that grit on her at the moment is Chi-Ilth, but she relies on those bleeds quite a lot to get the majority of her damage through, and the Destroyer being bleed immune means I can't see her being a good option. The same sort of goes for Valkyrie. She can just ignore unstoppables when she has enough of her pierce buffs and is awakened. But again, her extra bonus damage is instant bleed, which the Destroyer's immune to. She will be fine, don't get me wrong, her pierce damage and furies are very good, but she will lose out a bit. There is also something to think about in terms of, again, the order of operations. If you're fighting Juggernaut, and he has Unstoppable, and you intercept him, you will actually remove the Unstoppables before your hit lands, meaning your hit can land safely before Juggernaut's Unstoppables can react to you. If that happens here, this will be significantly less of a problem, because you can just intercept him regularly, and it will remove his Unstoppable. It does mean failed intercepts will get punished significantly, but regular ones will be just fine. If this isn't the case, I don't know. We have our Grit, but as I said, they don't really come along very well. We have Valkyrie, but again, we can't use her brilliantly. We have Decelerate, the primary user of which is Anti-Venom, who can also reverse some of that power gain potentially, so he could actually be a very good option. But after that, I'm not sure. Champions that have multiple sort of indestructible and unstoppable hits back to back might work, so we might be able to use Titania here with her Haymaker and just sort of brute force it, but we'll have to see when that comes out. Future encyclopedia here. While editing this, I did have a thought. The Destroyer stays unstoppable for half a second after dashing in, which means if the timing lines up, you may well just be able to parry him, and then as long as your first hit lands within half a second, he'll still be unstoppable, but that fulfills the criteria for removing it. You've hit him whilst he's unstoppable. I'm not sure exactly how the timings will line up, but there may not be quite as much of an issue here as first thought. Right, back to old me. The second problem is his destruction charges. The primary way he's going to gain these is either from you gaining a buff, or from him throwing a special one. Well, let's stick with Science Champions then to reduce the buffs as much as possible, and preferably ones that don't even gain the Dex buff, so we don't have to worry about that as well. And he loses one when inflicted with any non-damaging debuff, so let's look again at Science Champions for ones that inflict lots of non-damaging debuffs. The other way is to Dex properly the hits on his special one, and I really hope the window on this is quite generous, because for those of you that have done 6.2.6 Champion, you'll know sometimes you'll go, I definitely Dexed that hit of his special one, but the game says you didn't, so you didn't. Again, we'll have to see exactly how that works. But for champions that I will be looking to, for those that can inflict lots of damaging debuffs, or non-damaging debuffs, Photon, Luke Cage, Sandman, Scorpion, with his Torments, make sure, I would say, using Shock for Scorpion, because then you'll be Rupture immune, so you won't take any damage back from the signature ability. Spider-Ham and his Power Stings. Silk and her physical vulnerabilities. Titania on everything. Captain America Infinity War, when awakened, can place lots of them on his parries, though I wouldn't bring in a Cosmic Champion, because then you'll be armor breaking him and actually giving him charges. And finally, Cassie Lang and her Power Stings. I think any of these could do quite well. So that's it. Everything you need to know for the pre-release Destroyer armor. If you have any questions, please do leave them down below, but please remember that this is pre-release. There are some things that just can't be answered until he comes out. If this video has helped you in any way, you know how the sentence ends, and as always, thank you, and I will see you next time.